In the heart of Blackthorn Forest, a dense woodland cloaked in perpetual fog, there existed an unwritten rule: never enter after sundown. For centuries, the villagers in the nearby town of Briarwood spoke in hushed whispers of the forest's malevolent past, a place where countless travelers had disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the ancient trees and whatever dwelled within them. Despite the warnings, Elise, a curious botanist driven by her insatiable thirst for discovery, decided to brave the forest in search of the elusive bloodroot flower, said to bloom only under the full moon. Tonight was her chance. The sky was an endless expanse of ink, save for the eerie silver glow of the moonlight filtering through the trees. Her lantern flickered as she stepped into the forest, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. The air carried an unshakable chill, and the towering pines loomed like watchful sentinels. A strange unease settled over her, but she pressed on, her resolve fortified by the promise of discovery. Minutes turned into hours, and the deeper she ventured, the more distorted the forest became. The trees twisted unnaturally, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. The fog thickened, coiling around her ankles like a living thing. Somewhere in the distance, she heard a faint rustling, a sound too deliberate to be the wind. "Hello?" Elise called, her voice trembling slightly. She told herself it was nothing, perhaps a deer or a fox, but the rustling grew louder, closer, until it stopped altogether. Her breath caught as she turned, her lantern casting long, trembling shadows against the trunks. Nothing. Just the trees, standing silent and unyielding. She exhaled a shaky laugh, shaking off the nerves. "You're imagining things, Elise," she muttered, resuming her search. But then, a faint whisper. "Elise." She froze. The whisper was barely audible, like wind slipping through cracks in a door, but it was unmistakable. Her name. Slowly she turned again, her lantern shaking in her grip. "Elise." The voice came again, softer this time, almost melodic. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, weaving through the trees like a ghostly echo. Panic gripped her chest as her eyes darted through the shadows. And then she saw it. A figure. It was barely visible, a silhouette half hidden among the trees. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It simply stood there, watching. "Who's there?" Elise demanded, her voice wavering. No response. The figure remained still, and yet, as she stared, she realized it wasn't quite human. Its limbs were too long, its body too thin, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Suddenly, it darted forward, impossibly fast, a blur in the corner of her eye. She stumbled back with a scream, her lantern swinging wildly, but the figure was gone. Her heart thundered in her chest as she frantically scanned the darkness. "Elise." The whisper came again, now closer, right behind her. She spun around, but there was nothing. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to run as fast as she could, but her legs felt leaden. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something strange. The shadows cast by her lantern, they weren't hers alone. They moved independently, shifting and writhing across the ground, as if alive. The realization hit her like ice water. The shadows weren't from her light. They were watching her. "Elise." The whisper grew louder, angrier, the voice layered with 1,000 others. She ran, her boots pounding against the earth as the shadows seemed to stretch and reach for her. The trees blurred past, the fog thickening until it felt like she was running through water. Ahead, she saw the faint outline of a cabin, its windows glowing faintly with light. Salvation. She burst through the door, slamming it shut behind her. Inside, the air was stale, and the light came from a single flickering candle. The room was sparse: a table, a chair, and a cracked mirror on the wall. Her breathing was ragged as she tried to steady herself. Then, a voice from the shadows of the room: "You shouldn't have come here." She spun around, her eyes locking onto an old man sitting in the corner, his face obscured by the shadows. "Please, you have to help me," she begged, her voice trembling. The man didn't move. "They've marked you," he said flatly, his voice hollow. "Once the shadows see you, they don't stop. Not until you're one of them." Elise shook her head, backing away. "What are you talking about?" He pointed to the cracked mirror. "See for yourself." Hesitant, she approached the mirror, her breath fogging the glass. At first, she saw only her reflection, wide-eyed, pale, and trembling. But then, the shadows behind her began to shift, forming shapes, faces. Their hollow eyes stared back at her, mouths twisted in silent screams. Her blood ran cold as she turned to the old man. But the room was empty. The chair was vacant.
"The villagers found me, their faces pale with fear." "Elise," one of them whispered, "your eyes." I didn't understand until I saw my reflection in the window of the tavern. My eyes were black, completely, utterly black. That was a week ago. The whispers haven't stopped. They follow me everywhere, growing louder each night. The shadows creep closer, even in the daylight. I know now that I was wrong. The forest isn't just haunted, it's alive and it doesn't let go. If you ever hear the whispers, don't look back, don't stop. Because once they see you, they never stop watching. Story 2, The Stranger in the Woods. I've always prided myself on being a skeptic. Ghost stories, urban legends, whispers of the supernatural, they're nothing more than overblown myths invented to scare gullible people. So when I first heard about the so-called stranger in the woods near Hollow Creek, I laughed. A faceless figure watching from the trees, people disappearing without a trace. It was ridiculous, but that was before tonight. I came here with my flashlight, a notebook, and an unshakable sense of confidence, determined to write an article exposing the truth behind the legend. I wanted to prove, once and for all, that the stories were just that, stories. Now, as I stand here in these endless silent woods, I can't shake the feeling that maybe I've made a mistake. The first thing that struck me was the quiet. The woods are supposed to be alive at night. Crickets chirping, leaves rustling, distant animals calling out to one another. But here, there's nothing. The silence is oppressive, like the entire forest is holding its breath. I clicked on my flashlight and started down the narrow trail. My boots crunched against the dirt path, the sound unnervingly loud. Every few feet I stopped and listened, expecting to hear something, anything, but the silence just swallowed me whole. I told myself the stories were just meant to scare people. The figure people claimed to see, the so-called stranger, was probably just a trick of the light. But as I walked, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. The trees felt closer, their gnarled branches almost clawing at me. And then I heard it. A faint snap, like a twig breaking underfoot. I froze, shining my flashlight into the darkness. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing back at me. Nothing, just shadows and fog. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, a deer, or maybe a raccoon. But deep down, I knew better. The sound had been deliberate, too heavy for a small animal. I kept walking, my pace quickening. The air grew colder, biting at my skin, and the flashlight's beam seemed weaker, barely cutting through the thick fog. That's when I saw it, movement just at the edge of my vision. I whipped the flashlight around, my heart pounding. For a split second I saw something tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long to be human. It stood completely still, half hidden by the trees. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. No answer. I blinked, and the figure was gone. A chill ran down my spine as I scanned the darkness. My rational mind screamed that it was just my imagination, but my instincts told me to leave. I turned back toward the trailhead, but the path I had come from was gone. The trees had shifted, closing in around me. I don't know how long I wandered, but the forest seemed to twist and warp with every step I took. No matter which direction I turned, the trail never reappeared. The silence grew heavier, pressing down on me like a physical weight. Then came the laughter. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A faint, high-pitched giggle, like a child playing hide and seek. But as it grew louder, it became distorted, warped, like multiple voices laughing together in a way that no human throat could produce. "Stop it!" I yelled, spinning in circles, my flashlight trembling in my grip. "Who's there?" The laughter stopped, replaced by a low whisper. "Stay!" My blood turned to ice. The voice was soft, almost melodic, but there was something wrong about it. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the trees. The flashlight flickered, plunging me into darkness for a heart-stopping moment. When the light returned, he was there, the stranger. He stood only a few yards away, his tall, impossibly thin form illuminated by the weak beam of my flashlight. His face, or what should have been his face, was a blank canvas of pale, stretched skin. His head tilted slightly as if studying me, and his limbs hung at unnatural angles. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The stranger didn't move. Then with a flicker of the flashlight, he was gone. I ran. I don't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. Branches tore at my clothes, roots snagged my boots, but I didn't stop. The laughter returned, louder now, and I swear I could hear footsteps behind me, heavy, deliberate, keeping pace. Finally, I saw it. A small cabin in a clearing, its windows glowing faintly. Relief surged through me. I sprinted toward it, bursting through the door and slamming it shut behind me. Inside, the air was damp and stale, and the light came from a single flickering candle on a table. The room was bare, a chair, a dusty shelf, and a cracked mirror on the far wall. "Elena!" The voice whispered my name this time. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone where I was going tonight. I spun toward the mirror, my breath catching. At first, I saw only my reflection, pale and wide-eyed, but then the shadows behind me began to shift. In the mirror, I saw him standing just over my shoulder, his featureless face impossibly close. I screamed and turned around, but the room was empty. "Elena!" The voice hissed again, louder now, almost mocking. The door slammed shut on its own and the candle snuffed out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it was dead. Then I felt it, cold, bony fingers brushing the back of my neck. I bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The laughter surrounded me now, deafening, and I could feel his presence behind me, closing in. The last thing I remember before everything went black was his voice, low and guttural. "You'll stay." When I woke up, it was morning. I was lying at the edge of the woods, my flashlight clutched in my hand. I stumbled back to town, but no one believed me. They said I must have gotten lost, that the stress made me imagine things, but they're wrong. I can feel him even now, watching from the shadows. And at night, when the wind is still, I can hear the laughter. The stranger isn't a legend. He's real.